come to the first statement from the Foreign Secretary on Arctic security. Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by expressing my deep condolences to all those affected by the terrible train crash near Cordoba last night. Thank you to the Spanish emergency services who responded overnight and throughout today, and I'm sure the House will join me in thinking of the people of Spain at this distressing time. With permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'll make a statement on Greenland and wider Arctic security. On the evening of Saturday, the 17th of January, President Trump announced the intention to impose 10% tariffs on goods from Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden and the UK over the future of Greenland. This is a serious moment for our transatlantic discussions and partnerships. So let me outline to the House the UK's response, which rests on three key principles. First, Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Its future is a matter for Greenlanders and the Danes and them alone. This reflects the fundamental principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity to which this whole House is committed. Second, the use or the threat of tariffs against allies in this way is completely wrong, it is unwarranted, and it is counterproductive. Third, Arctic security is a shared concern and a shared responsibility for both sides of the Atlantic. It can only be effectively addressed and maintained through a cooperation between transatlantic allies and, crucially, through NATO. So instead of divisions that only aid our adversaries, we now need a serious and constructive dialogue about our Arctic security, which is built on respect for sovereignty and collective security and the rules which underpin our alliance. As the Prime Minister set out this morning, the North Star for the Government's foreign policy is to stand up for the UK's national interest, to defend and advance Britain's security, Britain's prosperity and Britain's values. And we do so through the alliances and partnerships that we build abroad that make us stronger here at home, including alliances where that transatlantic cooperation between Europe and North America has long been vital. As the Prime Minister has made clear, our close and deep-rooted partnership with the United States is a hugely important part of our security and our prosperity. The depth of our cooperation on intelligence sharing and defence helps keep us safe, and our trading relationship and the new agreements we have reached in the last 12 months are driving billions of pounds of investment in the UK, supporting jobs across the country. But the Prime Minister has also made clear that we will be very direct about our differences, as he was in speaking to President Trump yesterday. Because standing up for the UK national interest means the defending the principles that underpin stable and enduring international cooperation. That means respect for sovereignty, and it means respect for long-standing allies. Denmark is a close ally of the United Kingdom and the United States. Indeed, Denmark has long been one of the US's closest allies, a proud NATO member that has stood shoulder to shoulder with the UK and with the US, including at real human cost in recent decades. Rooted in that partnership, the US already has in place a 1951 treaty with Denmark, which already provides for an extensive US security presence in Greenland. And alliances endure because they are built on respect and partnership, not pressure. And tariff threats like this are no way to treat allies. Madam Deputy Speaker, the tariff threat has come following the pre-coordinated preparations for the annual Danish programme of activities under the framework Arctic Endurance, which is focused on addressing Russian security threats in the Arctic. And last week, at the request of the Danish government, one UK military officer currently based in Denmark joined a planning group visit in an observational capacity. And these sorts of visits are a regular part of military planning ahead of exercises and operations. Work amongst allies to strengthen Greenland's security that should be recognised for its importance, not used as a reason to impose economic pressure. A trade war would hurt workers and businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. It would be in no one's interests. Both sides of the Atlantic should be working together on Arctic security, not moving apart. And that is why the Prime Minister and this government are working intensively in the UK national interest to prevent this happening and to reach a resolution. Yesterday, the Prime Minister spoke directly with President Trump, with the Danish Prime Minister and other close allies and international leaders. Today, I welcomed the Danish Foreign Minister, Lars Rasmussen, here to London for valuable discussions earlier today, and the Europe Minister has been in touch with the Greenland Foreign Minister. I've also been in direct contact with the US, Canada, France, Germany, and other European colleagues. And on Wednesday, my Right Honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, will visit Denmark. We will continue with this urgent diplomacy in pursuit of the principles that I have set out. And we will also argue for the strengthening of our multilateral cooperation around Arctic security. Because the Arctic is the gateway for Russia's Northern Fleet to threaten Britain, Western Europe, and North America. Threats to undersea cables, threats to critical national infrastructure. We've seen greater presence of Russian ships and submarines making their way to the North Atlantic. We've seen Russian aircraft testing our air defence, as shadow fleet vessels pass through our waters, trying to evade our sanctions and continuing to fund the war in Ukraine. Northern Norway, Finland, sea routes through Greenland, Iceland, UK gaps have long been strategically significant when considering Russian threats. And we know that the strategic significance of the Arctic is likely to grow as the melting of Arctic ice stands to open new routes through the Arctic Ocean and with newfound geo-economic competition for critical minerals and rare earths. So Arctic security is crucial not just to the UK, but to the entire NATO alliance. Of the 8 countries north of the Arctic Circle, 7 are NATO allies. So across our alliance, working together, we can and should do more. So that is why last week I travelled to Finland and Norway to discuss the threats they currently face. My Right Honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, was also in Sweden. And in Helsinki, I met with the Finnish Foreign Minister and was briefed on their border force activities to tackle a Russian ship that had damaged undersea cables between Finland and Estonia. In northern Norway, I met with the Norwegian Foreign Minister. We signed a new agreement to strengthen our cooperation to tackle Russia's shadow fleet, and we travelled together to Camp Viking to see the work of the Royal Marines and their Norwegian partners. In the bitter cold of this unforgiving landscape, our commando forces are training and exercising, preparing for contingencies. For more than 50 years, the Royal Marines have trained in the Norwegian Arctic, but we are increasing that commitment, doubling the number of Marines there from 1,000 to 2,000 in the space of 3 years, and I pay tribute to the phenomenal work that they do. Alongside the landmark Lunar House Defence Agreement that will see the UK and Norway jointly operate a new fleet of Type 26 anti-submarine warfare frigates to hunt Russian submarines and protect our critical undersea infrastructure. And in the autumn, the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force saw thousands of troops, including over 1,700 British personnel, dozens of ships, vehicles and aircraft deployed from the Baltics to Iceland. And the UK plans to contribute to a range of exercises in the North Atlantic and High North throughout 2026. Because this is how we believe we best strengthen our Arctic security for the sake of both Western Europe and North America, together through alliances and partnerships, not through threats on tariffs or sovereignty that simply undermine our collective security. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the messages of cross-party unity and the shared conviction that the future of Greenland must be determined by the Greenlanders and the Danes. And whether it be on Greenland, on tariffs or on wider Arctic security, we are clear in our views, firm in our principles and steadfast in our commitment to safeguarding UK interests. The UK will continue to pursue constructive ways forward, collaborating intensively with our partners and allies, and pursuing our security, our prosperity and our values every step of the way. I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let me begin my remarks by expressing our condolences to the people of Spain following the devastating train crash yesterday. The Conservative Party is clear that the US administration's decision to announce tariffs on the UK over Greenland is completely wrong. Madam Deputy Speaker, people in both the United Kingdom and the United States will face higher costs because of this proposal of tariffs. There will be yet another burden for businesses across our country. And these tariffs also go against the United States' recent national security strategy, which says, and I quote, that it is natural and just that all nations put their interests first and guard their sovereignty. It goes on to say that we stand for sovereign rights of nations. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Greenland and Denmark. The future of Greenland must be for its people and Denmark to decide. It is theirs to decide alone. Denmark is a valued NATO ally and a leading contributor to Ukraine, indeed one of the highest per capita donors. We've also worked with Denmark on Arctic security, and it is an imperative that we and our European NATO allies now show a determination to go much further and back up our words with actions. The security challenges in the Arctic must be tackled head-on, particularly with the threat of Russia. Greenland is of geopolitical significance for every NATO member state, including the United Kingdom. And the best way to tackle threats is by working together in unison as NATO allies, because America's national security is indivisible from NATO's. They are one and the same. That is, collective security is the basis of our national defence architecture. Collective action in the immediate term is how we should work together to address these challenges. So will the Foreign Secretary say what resources the government will put in place to prioritise or repurpose its inventory to contribute to NATO's High North missions? What is the government doing to look at how, working with the US, we can build on existing joint defence agreements to broker a greater and consensual military presence on Greenland from both sides of the Atlantic? What is the government's plan to help lead international efforts to secure the safety of Arctic shipping routes as they become more open, and stave off exploitation of Greenland's critical minerals by malign actors, and also protect the region's fisheries, and boost digital connectivity and security, particularly at sea? Has the Foreign Secretary discussed this issue with Secretary Rubio? And if not, what will she propose to him when she does speak to him, including on the security issue in the High North? UK leadership does matter at this challenging moment for NATO, as we should advance a push from all NATO allies to thwart Putin's ambitions in the High North. It is incumbent on the United Kingdom to help to lead that charge, and our ability to convene outside the EU is a strength which we should play. Conservatives have also called on the Prime Minister to push for an urgent meeting of NATO, including and especially the United States. So will the government pursue this so that position can be reconciled behind closed doors so that we can present a united front to our adversaries? And on the issue of tariffs, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is important for our economy and for businesses that the government secures a reversal on this position. This is not a moment for megaphone diplomacy, but can she share the government's strategy for bringing the US round to revoking them before the kick-in date? And can she confirm the UK's position on countermeasures? Under the tariff deal agreed in the spring, the UK secured a 10% reduced tariff for 100,000 vehicles. So can she update the House on whether she expects this 10% tariff, Greenland tariff, to be added to the existing 10% tariff, effectively doubling the tax on British car exports to 20% from the 1st of February? Pharmaceuticals were also a cornerstone of the agreement on tariff-free exemptions. So does the Foreign Secretary expect life sciences to be protected from this new baseline tariff, or will the 100% tariff threat mentioned in late 2025 now be accelerated? And what specific support will her colleagues in DBT provide small and medium-sized business exporters who could face an overnight 10% increase in the cost for their largest export market? What assessment has been made in government about the potential economic impact of tariffs? What can be done to mitigate them? Madam Deputy Speaker, this is now time for cool but determined heads, because the stakes are significant and enormous for our country. It isn't just a big geopolitical moment. It's a moment of real concern for businesses in our country and exporters. And we're counting on British diplomacy to reverse the tariff situation, to bring swift end to this debacle over Greenland. The US is our closest ally. The way our security agencies operate together is unparalleled in modern history, and our bilateral trading relationship dwarfs every other relationship. This is a moment where we need to summon and leverage the strength and depth of that special relationship.
Foreign Secretary.
And I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for her response and also welcome her support for the sovereignty of Greenland and Denmark, and also for the strengthening of support for Arctic security against the Russian threat, which she is right to highlight. And she asked what work can be done to establish constructive discussions and talks. And indeed, this is an issue that I talked to the Danish Foreign Minister about today, because they have set out a process to have detailed talks with the US on how to strengthen security around Greenland, being very clear that the issue of sovereignty was non-negotiable, but there are many issues to be discussed around strengthening security. I have spoken to Secretary Rubio today, and we have agreed to take forward further discussions on this issue, and I can assure her as too, we will be pursuing every avenue for discussions directly with the US, but also with all of our close allies on this, the purpose being to prevent the tariffs, to prevent the trade escalation, the trade war that will be in no one's interest, and to replace the threats to sovereignty and tariffs with a constructive, shared approach to our security, including the issue of security in the Arctic. And I think it is a critical issue here that the Arctic is the gateway for the Russian Northern Fleet to be able to threaten the UK, to be able to threaten Western Europe, but also to be able to threaten the US, to be able to threaten Canada. And so that is why this is a shared threat and requires a shared response. And that is why I proposed, as part of the discussions in Norway and in Finland last week, that NATO should establish an Arctic sentry, similar to the approach that NATO has taken to the Baltic Sentry and to the Eastern Sentry. Coordination that brings together and looks in a strategic way at all of the issues around security across the Arctic. We believe it is through those partnerships and through those alliances that we can best strengthen our shared security against the threats that should concern us most.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The main purpose of the Prime Minister's speech today, his statement today, was of course to send out an international message, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for the skillful way in which she has amplified that message this evening. But there is another audience who deeply appreciate what the Prime Minister has had to say. Many ordinary people, many ordinary British people, are becoming increasingly anxious about the threats that are being made by one of our most important friends to one of our allies. They are frightened by the dark turn that international relations seem to have taken and the potential chaos that we may be heading for. In fact, I have to say, a friend of mine texted me today to tell me that as she was watching the Prime Minister live, she was weeping. She has found this very frightening. So could the Foreign Secretary please convey the thanks of so many of us for his clarity, for his calm and for his leadership?
I thank my right honourable friend for those remarks, and I will convey that message to the Prime Minister I think what we have clearly seen is that our Prime Minister is standing up for the UK national interest, standing up for our security and prosperity, but also standing up for British values as well, because we know that our security and prosperity is strengthened by alliances and strengthened by partnerships, not strengthened by pulling apart.
Democrat Senator Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I associate myself and my party with the comments of the Foreign Secretary about the terrible rail crash in Spain? And can I thank her for her statement? Madam Deputy Speaker, President Trump is acting like an international gangster, threatening to trample over the sovereignty of an ally, threatening the end of NATO altogether, and now threatening to hit our country and 7 European allies with outrageous, damaging tariffs unless he gets his hands on Greenland. This is an incredibly grave moment for the United Kingdom, Europe and our world. Without provocation or justification, the President of the United States is attacking our economy, our livelihoods and our national security. Trump has put British businesses and jobs on the front line in his unprovoked aggression. The only people cheering him on are Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. Only a few months ago, Trump hailed the special relationship at Windsor Castle. Now, thanks to his actions, it is nearly in tatters. So how do we stop Trump's damaging trade war? For a year now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister has tried a policy of appeasing Trump, flattering him, fawning over him, refusing to stand up to him, because, he argued, otherwise Trump would hit us with damaging tariffs. Well, the Prime Minister has tested his approach to destruction. It has failed. It is time for the government to change course. We have to finally be clear-eyed about the sort of man Trump is and treat him accordingly. He is a bully. He thinks he can grab whatever he wants, using force if necessary. And he is corrupt. The most corrupt president the United States has ever seen. So there are only 2 ways of getting him to back down: bribing him with a new jet perhaps, or a few billion in his crypto account, or standing up to him like we would with any other bully, standing together with our European allies to make him back down. That's the choice. Which one, Foreign Secretary?
Well, this is clearly a serious moment. I wonder if the honourable gentleman actually saw the Prime Minister's response this morning. And he should know that it is because this is a serious moment that we respond in a serious way. That this Prime Minister responds in a serious way, in a calm, robust and hard-headed way about what is in the UK's national interest, and also how we work together in the alliances that are crucial for our security, our prosperity, and also are underpinned by our values. That is why the Prime Minister has been so firm in the United Kingdom's response. It's why I welcomed the Danish Foreign Minister to London today. And I think that the honourable member's description of our Prime Minister's response and our UK government response is inappropriate. I would say I think this is a really important time for parties to come together on how we ensure that we can respond to the situation that we are in, that we can work closely with our allies, but that we can also create a constructive approach to our Arctic security, which ultimately will depend on transatlantic cooperation and ultimately will depend on ensuring that those alliances and that transatlantic alliance respects the principles of sovereignty and respects the principles of collective security. That is something we will do in a sober and serious way.
Dhesi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. What we're witnessing is a very rude awakening for European nations, including our own, that if you don't properly invest in sovereign capabilities for defence and security and rely instead on others, then sooner or later you will be bullied or blackmailed by larger nations. And the question for us is, are we just going to kick the can down the road and just trundle along with small, gradual increases in defence investment, or are we going to chart a path to 3% GDP defence spending in this Parliament? Now, in terms of Arctic security, the Foreign Secretary intimated that only one British officer was involved in the Danish-led Operation Arctic Endurance in Greenland. Could she please update the House as to our current and future planned participation, and are there any political or practical constraints in that future participation?
Secretary.
And the specific issue that he raised, it was not an operation, it was a planning process, as takes place very routinely, and that continues to be the case. What we are arguing for is a broader approach to Arctic security. In fact, the UK's strongest contribution is around the north of Norway. Our partnership with Norway is really now unrivalled. Both the commandos, the excellent work that I saw at Camp Viking and elsewhere, and also of the frigates, the joint frigates there. And that is our unrivalled. For a non-Arctic nation, our contribution to Arctic security is now unrivalled, and we see this as being part of Arctic Sentry, a wider approach to the collective Arctic security. But what I would also say is he raises the issue about investment. We are this is exactly why we are have put forward the biggest increase in defence spending for very many years.
Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary, I'm afraid, is being rather mealy-mouthed about a situation that the President of the United States obviously sees as very simple. He believes that either through extortion, and he's not denying that he may use military force to acquire Greenland, whichever way you look at it. So, two questions. First of all, as she will know, there are significant military assets owned by the United States based here in the United Kingdom. Could they be used as part of an invasion of Greenland against our will? And secondly, does she recognise that when tariffs were first wielded as a weapon against the Canadians, we should have stood with them rather than cutting a snivelling deal?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, all I would say to him, first of all, is clearly that is not the situation that we are talking about. We have been very clear about the importance of both sovereignty and collective security, that this is not just part of the NATO alliance, that these are fundamental principles that we stand for as well. And in terms of the work around tariffs, as we'll know, the work the Prime Minister led has been effective in addressing tariffs in the past. We will show the same determination and robust approach again. Similarly, we have done so on other issues as well. It is important that we focus around the results that we can get by taking a hard-headed approach. That is what we're continuing to do.
Onwurah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Knocking on doors in Denton and Westerhope, Arthur's Hill and Wingrove, for the first time in my 15 years as an MP, the number one issue was global insecurity. President Trump has succeeded in uniting the British people against his unwarranted attack on a close ally. Now, my right honourable friend is right to be calm and diplomatic, but will she reassure us that given the current President's volatility, she and her government will ensure that our sovereignty is not dependent on US capability, and specifically that our technology procurement, both civil and defence, will reflect this?
Well, my honourable friend is right to talk about the very strong feeling on this right across the UK, the very strong feeling for the sense of protecting sovereignty for the people of Greenland, for the people of Denmark more widely, and also the real deep sense that to have tariffs proposed in this way is just deeply wrong. It's also counterproductive to our collective security, but it is also deeply wrong. She also raises the issues about sort of UK resilience as well. She will know on things like the Five Eyes partnership, there is very deep, long-standing cooperation and shared technology, but there are also areas where we agree that Europe needs to do more for its own defence and its own investment as well, and that's what we're doing.
Hoare.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I declare an interest as Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Greenland. President Trump's threat to annex Greenland, either the easy way or the hard way, is pushing Europe to the verge of one of the biggest political crises and security crises we've faced in decades. Now his threat to impose punitive tariffs on those opposing his illegal annexation means that the President of our closest ally is using economic and military threats against the UK and other European nations simply for defending sovereignty, self-determination and international law. So on what basis does this government view this particular president as being a trustworthy and reliable ally?
Secretary.
Well, we have made very clear that threats to Greenland's sovereignty are wrong. Threats on tariffs and on economic pressure are wrong because allies should stand together and not face the kinds of threats that we have seen. Particularly, that is an issue for the UK, but also particularly Denmark, that has been such a close ally to both the UK and the US as well. We are taking a very robust, hard-headed approach to this, to work through what is in the UK national interest and to get a resolution to this that can protect and defend and strengthen the Arctic security and also UK security more widely, and that is the right thing to do.
Colleagues need to shorten their questions. Many members want to get in, and that depends on the length of your questions. Alan Gemmell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for setting out the UK's position on the future of Greenland for the people of Greenland and for the Danes to decide. It's not right that one of our closest and oldest allies threatens us with economic sanctions, and I have two questions for the Foreign Secretary. How will she explain to the US administration our interests and actions at this time and stop the sanctions and resolve the situation? And might she take an interest in the Franco-British fast jet replacement programme and a company called Aralis, so that we don't have to rely on a British solution, building on the excellent question from the member for Newcastle upon Tyne Central and West?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can say we have been very clear to the US and more widely about the importance of countries working together to strengthen security. That is exactly what Denmark has been seeking to do, to strengthen security of Greenland as part of strengthening Arctic security against the Russian threat. And that should be something which is recognised as important, recognised as valuable, where countries come together to do so, because Arctic security is a multilateral issue. It's not a unilateral issue, it's a multilateral issue. It will only be strengthened by countries working together. So this is about our interests on that shared collective security, but also our values in defending sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary, the Prime Minister, NATO, the Danes and others have been commended for responding to this through the usual channels and through the usual means. And that would be fine if we had an occupant of the White House who understood all of that and who respected all of that. But he laughs now, not just behind his hand, but blatantly in our faces as a result of that. So whilst all of that continues, we need to try and work out what makes this man tick. He is thin-skinned, he has an ego, and he doesn't like to be embarrassed. Should the state visit go ahead this year? Should football teams play in American stadia for the World Cup? These are things which would embarrass the President at home. We now need to fight fire with fire.
Well, I think we heard from the Prime Minister the approach that he was taking this morning, and what I would say is that the approach that our Prime Minister has taken, the approach that this government has taken, has already led to very big changes in the United States' initial proposals on tariffs that were, as a result, substantially reduced and changed as a result of that engagement. We've also seen, as a result of the engagement, big changes in the US approach to Ukraine, where considerable work has been done now to secure agreements around security guarantees that have been immensely important. And that is as a result of continued engagement, not just by the Prime Minister, but others more widely. So we're clear about the importance of working in the UK's national interests and pursuing different issues around this in order to make sure that we protect UK businesses, UK prosperity, and also our shared values, including around sovereignty as well.
Brickell.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And as a proud member of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly myself, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her visit to our Marines at Camp Viking in Norway and her unequivocal stance and support for collective security with NATO at its heart. Now, I welcome the Rycroft review into foreign interference in our politics. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary, in the context of NATO and Arctic security, whether she agrees it's vitally important that we get to the bottom of the role that Russian money plays in trying to subvert our public discourse on these vitally important issues?
Foreign Secretary.
I know that honourable friend and also others have been raising this issue, particularly about the hybrid threats from Russia. So there are the direct threats that we see in the Arctic, but also these broader hybrid threats, which range from sabotage, including on undersea cables, but through to the foreign interference and information interference as well. I know that the Select Committee is doing important inquiry into this issue as well and look forward to its conclusions, but we have substantially increased UK sanctions to address some of these interference threats.
Edward Morello.
The post-war world order was based on the premise that like-minded Western liberal democracies would stand up for each other, that we would expand democracy wherever we saw it, that we would lower the barriers to free trade, and that through NATO we would engage in collective responsibility. An attack against one was an attack against all. It is clear that the President of the United States does not share these values. Does she not agree that the UK should be closening our military and economic bonds with European allies who do share those values?
Well, what I would say is the transatlantic security relationship of North America, US and Canada and Western Europe and the whole of Europe working together around security has been immensely important for a long time, and we still continue to have the shared interests, shared threats. For example, Arctic security is very clearly a shared security interest, but we are also strengthening our direct security and defence cooperation with Europe. That was part of the EU reset, was strengthening defence cooperation with our European allies, where we are bound by our close geography as well as our shared values and interests, and we will continue to strengthen those relationships.
Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Donald Trump's appalling threats to seize Greenland, along with his disgusting bombing of Venezuela, are a new form of gangster politics that are set out in his new national security strategy, which also speaks of boosting support for the far right across Europe. We have to deal with that reality, and Trump's threats of tariffs this weekend show how little we can rely on the so-called special relationship. So I want to ask the Foreign Secretary, Instead of blindly following US policy, as we have all too often done in the past with disastrous consequences, isn't it now time to stand up to Trump and forge a new independent foreign policy based upon international law, peace and cooperation, important values that are the very antithesis of what Donald Trump stands for?
Can I just caution the honourable member against somehow suggesting equivalence in a whole series of different areas? And I obviously am disappointed he doesn't, as part of his discussions, recognise the scale of the threat from Russia, which is the most serious threat the UK faces.
Andrew Morrison.
We have to ride the Trump tiger as best we can until November 2028. But the future of Greenland is for Greenlanders. However, when she's talking to her Danish interlocutors, could she ever so gently point out that small countries like Denmark have historically spent very little on their and on collective defence? And can she also perhaps equally gently admonish Denmark, since along with most member states of the European Union, it has administered something of a punishment beating to this country since 2016.
Well, I'm going to say to him that I was delighted to see the Danish Foreign Minister in London today. He is a friend, and Denmark is a close friend of the UK. Denmark also stood firm alongside the UK, alongside the US, and including putting their own armed forces' lives at risk in Afghanistan, in other conflicts, in order to support close allies. I think they have shown immense dedication to principles of collective security. They continue to show substantial support for Ukraine against Russia, and I would just strongly show Denmark the UK's support.
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This week's tensions highlight the strategic importance of the Greenland-Iceland-UK gap and the urgent need for Europeans to fill its gaps in being able to defend that space, which currently can only be done by the United States of America. So can she update us on the government's discussions with our European counterparts on strengthening our defence industries and any discussions on full access to SAFE?
My honourable friend has immense expertise in this area. He's right to highlight the Greenland-Iceland-UK gaps as being crucial to maintaining the security of the Atlantic, and as one which a lot of the Arctic security issues are based. But it's also exactly why the UK and Norway are now jointly building new frigates as part of a major investment programme, one of the biggest defence contracts we have ever had, but also not just investing in jobs in the UK, but crucially in an unrivalled partnership to strengthen our maritime security.
Hobhouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will happily accept tariffs to oppose Trump and his corrupt regime. Not my words, but a Bath constituent who emailed me today. Does the Foreign Secretary not recognise the strong feelings of so many of our constituents who are ready to stand up to the bully that Donald Trump is and want this government to do the same?
Foreign Secretary.
I think across the country there are strong feelings and about the tariff threats that we have seen. It's why we have been very clear that they are completely wrong. I would also say that I think the impact of tariffs is felt on businesses, on consumers, on ordinary families in the US and in the UK. That is why, and in other European countries, that is why tariffs are completely counterproductive as well as being completely wrong.
Emma Lewell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's calm diplomacy this morning. It is right that only adversaries stand to gain from the fracturing of NATO. I know the government doesn't believe the US President is serious about using military force to seize Greenland, but even just in the last hour, he has refused to rule this out. And my right honourable friend will also know that the President spoke about wanting Greenland in his previous term in office. He has long been serious about this. As the UK is the lead nation in the Joint Expeditionary Force, can she assure me that alongside NATO-level discussions, we are also engaging fully with our JEF partners?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can tell her that we do regularly engage with the Joint Expeditionary Force partners. Indeed, there were meetings around the Joint Expeditionary Force last week, and I believe are further such meetings later this week as well, which of course the Ministry of Defence is heavily involved in supporting as well, exactly because we take these shared security issues so seriously. We know for a country like the UK, our security depends on the alliances that we build, including with close European allies through the JEF.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Greenland is being offered two options: to be sold or to be annexed. This is naked imperialism. The government of Greenland has made very clear that they will work with the US in any way that is necessary to protect our security and that of Europe's. But I'm afraid that beyond vague diplomatic assurances of diplomatic activity and claims of being hard-headed, as a result of today's statement, I am not any clearer on what the government is doing to keep us safe from these tariffs, but more importantly, to protect our security and the sovereignty of Greenland.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, what I would say to the honourable member, and I would be, actually, to be honest, I am surprised at that question from her, because she does have experience around foreign affairs, and she knows the way in which the diplomatic discussions take place and the urgency with which those discussions are taking place right now. She will understand the importance of those discussions. She will understand the importance of the collaboration with our allies and partners and the way in which those discussions take place. She will also have seen the results of taking a similar hard-headed and robust approach in previous issues and the previous discussions that we have taken and will continue to take forward. What I would also just say is that the people of Greenland, we have seen the protests on the streets in Greenland, we have seen the strong views expressed as well by the people of the Kingdom of Denmark more widely. We will continue to support them and their sovereignty.
Sonia Kamal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The 2009 Greenland Self-Government Act, Chapter 8, Section 21, states decisions regarding Greenland's independence shall be taken by the people of Greenland. Therefore, no external coercion should be applied to their people. What steps is my right honourable friend taking with our European allies to ensure that the Greenland's Self-Government Act is respected and that no major power can pressure the Greenlanders over their constitutional status?
Well, I welcome my honourable friend's point, and this is exactly why my colleague, the Europe Minister, has been in touch with the Greenland Foreign Minister, and why I had many discussions today with the Danish Foreign Minister about our support too for the sovereignty of the people of Greenland. It is for them to decide their future as part of, and for them and the Danes side by side to decide their future, and not for anyone else.
Martin Wrigley.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Foreign Secretary's approach, saying we should be working with our allies. I fear that Donald Trump does not agree with her, however. What is the government doing to harden our infrastructure? We are heavily dependent on several American IT systems. For example, Palantir, which is controlled by Peter Thiel, who is well into the coterie of Donald Trump's administration. We've seen with a sanction that they could switch off Microsoft providing services to the International Criminal Court. Will the government look into making Palantir not a single point of failure in our critical systems, in the health service, the defence and cabinet office, and now police?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I can tell him that we do take immensely seriously all issues around critical national infrastructure. We do have long-standing areas, for example, in our security and intelligence Five Eyes partnerships, which do involve technology partnerships which go back very many generations. And in fact, I remember some of my first meetings with Five Eyes meetings in the US on this in over 25 years ago, and that technology and partnerships have strengthened since. But he is also right to say that we should look at key areas where critical national infrastructure needs to be strengthened as well.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to associate myself with the Foreign Secretary's statement that the future Greenland is a matter for the Greenlanders and the Danes and them alone. We all know that the geosecurity of the High North is because of Russia's threat to NATO. I'm really pleased you went to Norway last week because, in fact, we have 2 Russian bases on NATO territory in Svalbard. What discussions did she have with her Norwegian counterparts about the possibility of ending the Russian presence on NATO territory in Svalbard?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, he's right to highlight the issues in the High North being about the Russian threats, and this has long been the case, but we have seen those threats grow. There was a time at the ending of the Cold War when I think everyone was optimistic that this might fundamentally change, and sadly, many years on, that has proven not to be the case, and it is why this partnership between the UK and Norway is crucial, and it's crucial for our security, but it's actually crucial for the security of the whole of NATO and of many of our allies as well. I can assure him we keep a range of issues under discussion.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary is, of course, absolutely right to insist that the future of Greenland is a question only for the people of Greenland. Does she acknowledge, though, that this crisis is the consequence of our weakness, of decades of failure on the part of Europe and the UK to invest in defence, and indeed a historic failure of statecraft on the part of the United Kingdom that saw one naval officer attend Greenland and have the consequence of 10% tariffs imposed on us? So she mentions this conversation she had in Scandinavia last week. Did she offer to do more than simply cooperate with our partners and neighbours, but to actually lead in the defence of Greenland by committing a proper joint expeditionary force led by the UK with the proper commitments to ensure the safety of Greenland?
Secretary.
Can I just say to the honourable member that the biggest threat to Arctic security comes from Russia. And he would have a lot more credibility in talking about any of these Arctic security issues if he and his new party would actually look inwards at themselves and do the long-needed investigation into Russian influence in their party.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's strong response and the assurances we've heard from the Foreign Secretary today. She quite rightly made clear that Donald Trump's claims to need to possess Greenland for security reasons are complete and utter nonsense. The US already has access, and she talked about a multilateral approach to Arctic security. There is also the critical minerals element, which I suspect is also a great deal to do with his interest in the country. Can she say what we're doing to have a similar multilateral approach to critical minerals as we seek to divest from Chinese reliance?
And Foreign Secretary.
My honourable friend is right to raise there's the broader issue around critical minerals. You know that many of the issues around Greenland are long-term issues as opposed to immediate critical mineral issues. But there is a wider thing about ensuring that we have security around our critical mineral supply chains and needing to work with other countries to prevent any country having a chokehold around the supply of critical minerals. That is crucial in some of our issues around new green technologies, but it's also crucial more widely on our economic prosperity and economic security for the future.
Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. All relationships, especially special relationships, need a foundation, must have a foundation of respect and mutual consent. What is the status within NATO of economic measures being used to force the annexation of a sovereign territory within NATO?
Well, NATO allies need to respect each other, and that is a core part of the NATO alliance. It is what makes the alliance effective, and to not do so simply aids our adversaries.
Baxter.
Speaker, I welcome both the Foreign Secretary's statement and the Prime Minister's remarks earlier this morning. It may be surprising that neither Greenland nor the Arctic were featured as a strategic priority in the United States' own national security strategy, which was published in November, but transatlantic trade did. So will the Secretary of State make clear to the United States administration that both its goals of prosperity and long-term security of the Arctic can only be achieved through close cooperation with allies rather than dangerous rhetoric and actions that risk weakening the collective strength on which we all rely? Secretary?
I agree with my honourable friend because our economic prosperity for the UK, for Western Europe, for right across Europe, but also for North America, including the US, Canada as our other NATO allies, our prosperity is strengthened by trade rather than tariffs. Our security is strengthened by the cooperation through NATO and by respect for each other's sovereignty and collective security.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary is right to say that NATO allies should not threaten one another. She is also right to highlight the threat and potential harm caused by trade wars and tariffs imposed. But does she understand the bemusement on the Northern Ireland benches that while she talks strongly about sovereignty, it was this House that diminished the sovereignty of Northern Ireland and placed us into the European Union Customs Code? And I hope she recognises that there is a double-edged sword on tariffs for Northern Ireland. But Speaker Mike Johnson spoke at the weekend and he's addressing Parliament tomorrow. And he said very clearly that whilst he has heard what President Trump has said, he does not know what his aspirations are in relation to Greenland. Does she?
Secretary.
Well, what I hope that really everyone across, not just the US administration, across the US would agree, is that we should have shared aspirations for our shared security in the Arctic and recognise that that includes respect for sovereignty, respect for that collective partnership, and also recognising that the nature of the Arctic security threat and how much of it is maritime as well depends on countries working together, because it depends on being able to address issues around the eastern end of the Arctic, around northern Norway, and around the western end of the Arctic and the Greenland-Iceland gap. It's only through having that cooperation that you can keep the Atlantic safe, you can keep all of our countries safe.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
As possibly the only MP with American grandchildren, would the Secretary of State agree with me that whatever disagreements may arise between the government and the government of the United States about Greenland, the bonds of friendship and kinship between the peoples of this island and the peoples of the United States are historic, vital and enduring?
Foreign Secretary.
My honourable friend is exactly right to highlight the strength of our bonds, the people-to-people bonds, but also the deep historic bonds and the continuing cooperation bonds. Even today, the US and UK have been discussing issues around terrorism threats in northern Syria and needing to tackle Daesh and continued threats there. So we have so many different areas of shared interests and also that shared history, and that is why it is so important that we pursue this disagreement in a robust and constructive way now.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In pushing back against the tariffs, can the Foreign Secretary and others make clear to the US that it's not just the potential imposition of these tariffs, but it is the bandying about of the threat of the tariffs which is so disruptive and difficult for major British businesses, such as the Scotch whisky industry, that export to the US. And therefore, if they're just game playing or tactics, they are causing real damage right now.
I agree with the honourable member about the impact that threats can have, the instability that it can cause, but also the importance of us having some stability, some respect in relationships is actually a crucial underpinning of the economy.
Clive Efford.
Speaker, if this were a debate truly about the security of the Arctic,
we would be talking about more than the sovereignty of the land of Greenland, which is clearly a matter for the Danes and the people of Greenland. But does she agree that our collective interests and security are best served through us working together collectively through NATO, rather than creating division in that alliance, which will only help those who want to do us harm?
I agree with my honourable friend very strongly on this, and I saw myself in the north of Norway the immense cooperation between the Royal Marines, the Commandos, and our Norwegian colleagues, and also they briefed me on the nature of where the threat issues and concerns are, and the way in which we need to respond to them, and also the way in which that response there to the north of Norway also helps with the security right at the other side of the Atlantic in the US and in Canada as well.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trump is certainly an unreliable, unpredictable ally, and his comments today or yesterday about the Norwegian leadership makes, I think, us all wonder whether he is of sound mind. What can you do? You have to deal with him. I'm sure it hasn't escaped the Foreign Secretary's notice that the messaging from Congress is quite different to the messaging from the White House, and some of those divisions were exposed, particularly before Christmas in the passing of the Defence Appropriations Act in America. Can she reassure me that conversations are being had, not just with the administration, but also right across Congress, where we have quite a lot of allies who are willing to support our position?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the honourable member is right that there are many different perspectives across the US system, both in terms of in the administration and in Congress as well. As he will also know, we have always had very close engagement with all aspects of the US system, and including the engagement with Congress. And indeed, the House Speaker is in Parliament today.
Sarah Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to put on the record my gratitude for the leadership that the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary has shown on this issue as it is evolving. But does the Foreign Secretary share my confusion that any member of this House who claims to be a patriot would be off joining a party who blames NATO for starting the Ukraine war, whose leader admires Vladimir Putin, and whose leader in Wales is currently serving 10 years in prison for taking Russian bribes?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I do agree with my honourable friend. We need to be very clear where the threat to our security, to UK security, comes from, and the threat from Russia to our security, be that through the Arctic or be that through Ukraine, and the impact that it has on Europe. So I think, frankly, the idea that members of this House who call themselves patriots have been left to join a party that is so soft on Russia, I think is just astonishing.
Dr. Ellie Charles.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Donald Trump rides roughshod over international law and international alliances. Now, the PM said the trade war is in no one's interest. Of course, but we all know that if you give ground to a bully, you get bullied even more. Does the Foreign Secretary recognise that after a full year of attempting to appease Donald Trump, that strategy has comprehensively failed, that it's time to replace submission to the US with strength and solidarity with our European partners, and that the UK needs to make clear to Donald Trump that there are red lines, and that if he engages in hostile activity towards the UK, that will have practical consequences, not least in trade?
Yeah. Well, the UK security is strengthened by the NATO alliance, the transatlantic alliance. I know that there are some who want to reject Europe, there are some who want to reject the US and North America. We know that it is that transatlantic partnership that is what keeps us safe and is crucial. And that is why we believe in continuing with NATO. I know that there are some parties who want to ditch it.
Grace.
Thank you, Madam Deputy
Speaker. I want to welcome the calm and robust approach to American allies on this issue from the Foreign Secretary and from the Prime Minister this morning. State sovereignty, respect for territorial integrity and the right of self-determination has been the bedrock of global affairs since the end of World War II. Indeed, it's why a Ukrainian victory against Russian aggression is so important for global stability. Can the Foreign Secretary set out how, in order to deter further Russian aggression on this continent as well, we are working with our high Arctic partners in Norway and in Finland, for example, to further protect our own continent? Thank you.
I welcome that from my honourable friend, because the work we are strengthening, we're increasing we're doubling the number of UK Marines who are based in the north of Norway in the space of 3 years. We're building the new jointly building frigates in order to strengthen our Arctic security. And we are also working through NATO, but also beyond, through the coalition of the willing and with the US on security guarantees for Ukraine, because that is crucial to delivering a just and lasting peace.
Blake Stevenson.
The Western world must remain united to keep us all safe from both Russia and China. Regrettably, we're far from united right now, and many of our constituents will be concerned about the risk to our country and critical infrastructure. At the same time as trying to reinvigorate our relationships with our NATO partners, should our planning assumption, our worst-case planning assumption now be that the USA may not be by our side if and when we need them in the future? And if it wasn't clear before this week, surely it's clear now that spending on defence must rise immediately to at least 3% of GDP. Does the Foreign Secretary agree?
Yeah. Well, this government is responsible for the biggest increase in defence spending for very many years, and he will know that under the previous Conservative government, the level of investment in defence did not reach 2.5% throughout their period. And I think that the defence infrastructure was hollowed out for too long. It's right that we invest in it for the future, but it's also right that we build our partnerships.
Davey Griffith.
Thank you very much. As the Foreign Secretary has already alluded to, the 1951 agreement allows the US to construct and operate military bases across Greenland, house personnel and control the movement of ships and aircraft. So will she do all she can to urge US counterparts to use this agreement to provide enhanced protection for NATO's northern borders, and drop the outrageous idea of the threat of tariffs, which is causing very damaging uncertainty for our industry, and if implemented would not only hit our industry but would further fuel inflation for the US consumer?
Foreign Secretary.
My honourable friend makes a really important point, because the 1951 agreement has huge flexibility and provides for actually considerable joint working between the US and Denmark and Greenland on strengthening security in that part of the Arctic, and I know many countries will be keen to work with them on exactly that. And that's why we think the talks that had begun last week between the Danish Foreign Minister and also the US Secretary of State and Vice President were an important opportunity to be able to explore the 1951 treaty.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Diplomacy relies on rational actors, yet even the last fortnight we have seen Donald Trump declare that he is not bound by international law, only his own morality. He's deployed paramilitary forces against his own people, and he speaks of cancelling elections. How apt. We also see the unilateral kidnapping of the president of an independent country. We are not dealing with a rational man. He responds only to shiny baubles, as we've seen with the incredible saga of the Nobel Peace Prize. So I want to agree with the Right Honourable Member for North Dorset and ask the government if they will consider removing the King's visit to the United States and also a boycott of the World Cup to show Donald Trump that the only thing he responds to is his own pride.
Well, what I would say to the honourable member is that we have long, deep interests and partnerships with the US that go back through many years. The engagement that the Prime Minister has led with the US administration and with the President has led to important results, including billions of pounds of tech investment in the UK and also crucial security cooperation, for example, on Ukraine, with the development of security guarantees in support of the work of a coalition of the willing. But this is an issue in which we strongly disagree. And that's why the Prime Minister has made that absolutely clear. We will be very direct about the areas in which we disagree, and we will set those out, and we will also work with our allies intensively to address those, because the sovereignty of Greenland is a vital, important principle we will defend.
Steve Witherden, after which I will call Steve Darling. Steve Witherden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. President Trump's threats to Greenland must be taken very seriously. Given Trump's banditry in Venezuela, I fear the Prime Minister's hopes of calm discussion may fall on deaf ears. Will the government stand firm with our European allies and the people of Greenland in opposing rampant American territorial expansionism?
Yes. Well, we work closely with our European allies. That's exactly why I have discussions with the Danish Foreign Minister today. It's also why I've had discussions with the US Secretary of State today, and why we will have further discussions, and why the Prime Minister has had discussions with both European leaders and also President Trump. But I would say to him that the role of the government is to pursue the UK's interests in a calm, robust and hard-headed way, which is about getting results and also ensuring that we build the partnerships, including with the US and including with Europe, that make all of us stronger together.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trump and Putin both respect strength. Neither of them respect international law. In light of that, I'd like to welcome the work being undertaken by the Prime Minister and under the leaders from Canada and Europe around the coalition of the willing. The Secretary of State has already outlined what we're doing around strengthening our and neighbours' capabilities, but can you explain how the coalition of the willing will become the coalition of the capable to make us stronger?
Yeah. Well, I thank him for his support for the coalition of the willing. He will know that the UK and France set out a declaration of intent. There is further work still underway on the security guarantees. I would caution him against what I hope he did not mean as equivalence around the US and Russia, because obviously it is Russia that imposes the significant threat to Ukraine and to the whole of Europe, and the US is a long-standing and close ally defending security in Europe.
Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for the strong statement she's made today. I've been disappointed to hear so much politicisation of a national security issue in this House, but can the Secretary of State confirm to me that just as the future of Ukraine should be determined by Ukrainians, the future of Denmark should be determined, of Greenland should be determined by the Denmark and Greenlanders?
Well, my honourable friend is exactly right, that these principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, it's underpinning around the UN Charter, but also around the rules that really underpin so many of our alliances, including the NATO alliance. At its heart is the very simple principle that the future of Greenland is for the Greenlanders and the Danes alone.
Robert Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State's statement, but can I ask her, with all sincerity, as per her statement, how she intends to have serious, constructive dialogue built on respect and rules with a man who wants to drop peace and go to war simply because he didn't win a prize?
Well, we have a long-standing NATO alliance, a long-standing partnership, not just with the US, but also with Western Europe. We continue to discuss with the US issues affecting peace around the world. For example, I would give him the example of Sudan, which I think has not had the level of international attention that it needs, but where the US are putting in considerable efforts to seek to get a ceasefire in Sudan, and the UK is working with not just the US but other members of the Quad in order to support a desperately needed ceasefire.
Annie.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And last week I was delighted to lead a debate on the very topic of the High North and Arctic security, highlighting that the UK, because of our geography, should be considered a frontline nation in the ongoing war with Vladimir Putin, and that we cannot afford to sleepwalk unprepared into a geopolitical High North and Arctic. Does she agree with me that as a frontline nation we must urgently increase public awareness of the threat we face and the effect that will have on our constituents? And will she discuss with the Defence Secretary and our allies the possibility of urgently increasing the capability of the Joint Expeditionary Force to defend both the UK and our High North allies, something I know will be welcomed in countries like Estonia, whom I visited at the start of the year?
Foreign Secretary.
I thank the honourable member for his question. One of the things that by increasing our presence in the north of Norway, increasing the number of Marines from 1,000 to 2,000 over the space of 3 years, that also helps support the Joint Expeditionary Force and is a crucial part of our cooperation across not just the Arctic but also the Baltic as well, and that work was welcomed both in Finland and Norway, where I was last week.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. President Trump has stated that he no longer feels an obligation to think purely of peace. He has threatened a trade war with the UK and Europe, and he has refused to roll out military force against Greenland. This shows that President Trump and his administration cannot be trusted. Will the government therefore consider a review into the UK's intelligence sharing with the US at this very dangerous and volatile time and until Trump is in power?
Let me just be really clear with the honourable member. Our Five Eyes intelligence and security partnership is vital and keeps us safe. It keeps us safe every single day of the week, every single day of the year. And that is vital. It's particularly close with the United States, but also with Canada, Australia and New Zealand as well. And our security depends on sustaining and continuing that Five Eyes partnership.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister for the clarity they've given today on the future of Greenland. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that while recent comments from the United States have generated understandable concern, the correct response is not panic or escalation, but calm diplomacy grounded in the clear, simple principle that Greenland's future is a matter for the Greenlandic people? And secondly, does she agree that the real strategic challenge in the High North remains Russia and its militarisation and aggression, which NATO must continue to confront together as partners of and not opponents of the United States?
I do agree with my honourable friend. We need to be purposeful in our response, and also that for all of us to recognise that the greatest threat to the UK's security and to the European security and also to North American security does come from Russia, and we have shared alliances. The US is a close partner in strengthening our security against Russia.
Thank you. I absolutely agree with the sanctity of territorial integrity and how fundamental it is to sovereignty. And indeed, those are the principles which provide a powerful basis to challenge the US's posturing. I do not at all dissent from the Foreign Secretary's statement, but I am intrigued as to how this government is properly so exercised about America's disrespect for territorial integrity of Greenland, but is so disinterested in the disrespect of the territorial integrity of our own country, whereby the European Union imposes colony-like its laws in 300 areas of law on a part of this United Kingdom and insists on an international customs border to partition this United Kingdom. Now that the government has got hold of the importance of territorial integrity, can we look forward to them reasserting it in respect of our own country?
Well, I would just say I know the honourable member's views, but the Windsor Framework was about sustaining the Good Friday Agreement. That was a shared agreement underpinned by principles and underpinned by peace.
Frank McNally.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for her statement, as well as the Government's commitment to Arctic security and the recognition of the threats that we face. Does my right honourable friend agree that the partnership with Norway, which includes the £10 billion contract for Type 26 frigates secured by this Government and set to be delivered on the Clyde, including by some of my constituents, makes clear that beyond the rhetoric we are hearing at present, the Government is absolutely committed to playing its part within NATO to uphold our collective global responsibilities?
My honourable friend is right to welcome the £10 billion contract that supports thousands of jobs, not just in his constituency and across the UK, but is also driven not just by the strengths of our defence industry, but crucially by the strengths of our joint cooperation with Norway and the shared operations we will be able to take forward in future.
Caroline Voden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement and her commitment to Greenland, which is not for sale. President Trump's threat of tariffs is an alarming escalation and strange behaviour from someone who the Foreign Secretary describes as a close ally. Now, France and Germany have suggested imposing retaliatory tariffs, but our Prime Minister has dismissed this. He says he doesn't want to start a trade war with the US. So could the Foreign Secretary tell the House which side the UK will be on if our European friends and neighbours decide to pursue this retaliatory course of action?
Well, we've always been clear that to have a trade war between any nation, certainly between the US and European countries, but between any nations across the world, is deeply damaging and is certainly not in anyone's interest. And that is why our first priority right now should be to prevent this happening and to prevent the tariffs going forward and to build a shared sense of security.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that we should send a message of reassurance to our children and young people who will undoubtedly be feeling concerned and scared about the developments in the Arctic and Greenland and more broadly regarding our international system? Does she agree that they know instinctively that international cooperation, standing up for our allies, international friendship and defending a rules-based system, they know instinctively that this is the right way for our world? And does she agree that they should take some reassurance from the fact that our government, this House and our allies agree with them?
And I welcome my honourable friends framing this about the interests of our young people and the values around shared cooperation. It is the cooperation with our allies that makes us stronger.
Speaker, can I commend the Government for standing firm with our European allies in supporting the principle that the future of Greenland is a matter for her people and her people alone. And I know that the Government will make every diplomatic effort to avoid the imposition of these punitive tariffs. However, if they were to be imposed upon us, will it be the policy of the Government to pursue a coordinated approach with our European allies in any countermeasures that may prove necessary?
Well, at all stages, we have discussions, coordination with our allies, but the Prime Minister made clear this morning our focus has to be on preventing a trade war. It has to be on preventing additional tariffs being introduced and on building the constructive approach to our shared security.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. How many times do my Lib Dem colleagues and I need to come to this place and tell the Government that Trump cannot be trusted? His behaviour is that of a spoilt child, bullying his allies, all the while looking to swell the coffers of those closest to him. By working with our European partners in NATO, we must persuade Trump that his aggressive approach to Greenland and the threats of tariffs is not acceptable behaviour from our closest ally. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary to try to persuade the Prime Minister that we need to stand up to this bully in the White House before he causes untold damage to the UK and to Europe?
Well, I just say to the honourable member, the job of government is to pursue the new UK national interest, to build alliances, to work with our allies, both in the US and in Europe, in order to promote the UK's prosperity, our security and our values. We do that in a serious, hard-headed way, and not in the way that, unfortunately, the Liberal Democrats have taken.
David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. To say the very least, Donald Trump's actions in Greenland and the related sanctions on the UK are not befitting of a trustworthy ally. So does the Foreign Secretary now accept that President Trump does not respond to weakness and that, as Canada has shown, we must stand firm against this bullying behaviour, and that, as the Liberal Democrats have argued for months, we must work more closely with our EU allies?
Well, again, I would say that our strength, our security and our prosperity depends on things like the NATO alliance, in which we work closely with our North American allies, the US and Canada, and also with our European allies as well. So that strength of relationship and the fact that the UK works so strongly at the heart of that relationship, as opposed to rejecting one side or another, which is what makes us stronger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. President Trump questioned the Danish right of ownership of Greenland, saying there are no written agreements, it's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago. Whilst Trump may today be challenging Greenland, on that basis, what assurance can the Foreign Secretary give that our overseas territories and those of our other allies would not come under a similar challenge from President Trump?
Well, we have been very clear that the principle of sovereignty, of territorial integrity, is fundamental. That is why the Prime Minister has made clear our strong disagreement with President Trump on this issue, and not only that, the importance that we see of issues like Arctic security being collective ones, and that the threats is no way to treat allies.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister insists a trade war is in no one's interest, yet we know the US has declared sanctions on our economy in spite of the so-called special relationship. If these sanctions come to pass, I ask the Secretary what concrete measures will be put in place to protect UK businesses from their detrimental effects.
Well, the Prime Minister has already discussed this issue with President Trump, made clear our position, and we are working through diplomacy, through continued different avenues to stress the importance of respecting sovereignty, the importance of collective security, and crucially the fact that tariffs benefit no one and are completely wrong in this situation.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has rightly outlined the importance of cooperation with our allies over this serious issue. But as we've seen, there isn't a consistent approach on retaliatory tariffs. Can she describe to the House the discussions the UK government had with our European allies before ruling out retaliatory tariffs?
Well, the UK is continuing to hold discussions with European allies, exactly as I have been doing today with the Danish Foreign Minister, and as the Prime Minister has been doing throughout the weekend, just as he also made clear our strong view to President Trump and our strong view to the US that we need to prevent these tariffs in the first place. We need to take action together to make sure that that happens.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Exactly 2 weeks ago, the Foreign Secretary told me that I was quite wrong to describe Donald Trump as a threat to liberal democracy. Since then, we've seen the horrifying shooting of Rennie Good, trumped-up charges against the chair of the Fed, and direct threats to Denmark and this country. Now, I understand that the Foreign Secretary cannot publicly agree with me, but if the government is serious, why aren't we seriously rearming, especially when that will help our economy anyway, And is the Foreign Secretary worried that the hour is getting too late to act?
Well, I think the question that the Honourable Member was raising was about the increase in defence spending. Well, that is exactly what we are doing. We are investing. We have introducing the most substantial increase in defence spending for many years. I do think that under previous governments, the defence infrastructure was hollowed out, but that's exactly why we're increasing investment now.
Dr Elpingerton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A week or so ago, I asked the Foreign Secretary at the dispatch box, where was the red line? What was the Rubicon that would have to be crossed that would lead the UK to hang together with our values-based allies in opposition to the imperialist ambitions of Donald Trump? I have to confess I felt a brief moment of pride yesterday when I thought that Rubicon had been reached, but I've been filled with increasing fear today when I fear that we might again allow ourselves to be picked off. We might allow ourselves again to prostrate ourselves in front of the President as we beg not to be treaded upon. So I ask the Secretary of State again, the Foreign Secretary again, what is the Rubicon that would have to be crossed? And this is not just an academic question. We are, through our overseas territories in the Caribbean and in the South Atlantic, a Western Hemispheric nation. Is the red line the Falkland Islands?
Yes. Well, I really would just say to the Honourable Member, what we have seen from our Prime Minister is a serious level of international leadership that is immensely important, a robust and hard-headed approach to the UK's national interests and to the way in which we achieve results, that has achieved results in a series of different areas, and also the way he has set out this morning the principles that guide us, including the strong defence of the principle of sovereignty, and that Greenland is for the Greenlanders and for the Danes for its future to decide.
Ian Sollum.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has talked a lot about military cooperation today, less so about economic security cooperation. She'll remember that the Prime Minister abolished the subcommittee of the National Security Council on the Subcommittee for Economic Security. I was pleased that the Minister for Economic Security was here for some time, but he isn't part of that National Security Council. How are these economic security questions and coordination with partners being handled and managed in government?
So I can tell him that as Foreign Secretary, I take the economic security issues immensely seriously. It's why we are strengthening the work around critical minerals and the economic security that comes from international supply chains. And he will know that there are issues around critical national infrastructure that also underpin our economic security. So this is taken immensely seriously right across the government, including on the National Security Council.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much. Can I thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for your patience in getting us all in, much appreciated. Can I also thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement? Whilst I agree that the sovereignty of Greenland is a matter for our own people, I do understand the dangers that are present with the Russian threat and aggression. Rather than making simply statements of support for Greenland's sovereignty, will the Foreign Secretary outline how we in this country, as close allies of the USFA, and as a nation which relies on the security of that area, will liaise with the USA and Greenland about enhancements of security and greater strategic facilitation, recognising that diplomacy is more than words, but it is actions, and to actively seek solutions that we can achieve? Thank you.
Well, this is an important question to finish on because the UK is proposing a new Arctic sentry as part of NATO. We already have a Baltic sentry and an Eastern sentry that pull together operations coordination in a strategic way to look at the defence of those regions and how all NATO allies can pull together to support that. We believe the same is now needed for the Arctic. The Arctic is the gateway for the Russian Northern Fleet to threaten the whole of the transatlantic alliance. And that is why an Arctic sentry, we believe, would be in everyone's interests.
That is the end of the statement on Arctic security. I'll give the front benches a moment or two to shuffle over as we prepare for our second statement.